Okay, so we've got a pretty unique presentation for you guys tonight. We're midway into the week of inclusive excellence. We have been inspired to contemplate social justice by some really great speakers so far. Yonatan's talk is going to continue to inspire such contemplation, but we're going to come at it this time from a purely scientific perspective. The Office of Diversity Diversity at Cal State East Bay and Wonderfest, Men of Success have all come together to put this show together as sort of the first of its kind, bringing together these different kinds of themes. One of the most common mistakes that people make in the world is to equate a human capacity for intelligence with the products of civilization. It's now well understood that civilization happened anywhere that mixed already smart people with the right ecological conditions, the right animals and plants and climate. And it's happened several times in several different places. What can we say then about what happened to make us smart, about how we came to be human? It turns out we can say an awful lot. There's quite a bit that we can say. And that's what you're going to hear from Yonatan tonight. Yonatan is going to be talking about some of his work on the origins of human intelligence, the origins of the capacity for human intelligence. The knowledge of this has been building for many decades, but it hasn't really been all that well publicized. It's not been something that has reached the public conception in the powerful way that it should. Yonatan was born and raised in Addis Ababa, got his BA from Haramaya University, went to grad school, got his PhD from University of Cape Town in South Africa, and is now doing a postdoc at the University of California at Berkeley. He just got back from a long field season in Ethiopia, where he's uncovering more evidence of our common origins. Let's give a warm welcome as he brings us an inclusive, Afrocentric, scientific evidence for how we got smart.
I'd like to thank Dr. Gilbert for the wonderful introduction, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming out here tonight. I was here on Monday listening to the talk about the story of Henrietta Lacks as told by her grandchildren. A wonderful story. Now, the story of Henrietta Lacks is only a few decades old. What we are going to talk about tonight is tens and hundreds of millennia old. So we will be talking about the African origins of human intelligence. We will define what human intelligence is in the anthropological and archaeological record. And then we will see what evidence we have, what scientific evidence we have for the evolution of human intelligence, and what that means for the current state of affairs in the world. Can we make this light a bit dimmer? So first, what do we mean by human intelligence? What makes us unique from the rest of the animal kingdom, from the rest of the pack? How is human uniqueness defined? So we are unique in that we have complex cognition, and this is the only thing that makes us very unique from other sister species and other ancestral hominid species, including the Neanderthals. By complex cognition, we mean the capacity for analogical thinking, the capacity for symbolic thoughts, the capacity for planning in depths and across a very big expanse of distance on the space, and the capacity for multitasking and problem solving. And this is what makes our species very unique and very successful. in the hominid pack. The current knowledge we have about the evolution of our species is that in the northeastern part of Ethiopia, we have the earliest fossil for anatomically modern humans, represented by this adult cranium named Homo sapiens hidaltu, dated to 160,000 years ago. This was actually discovered by a number of scientists, some of whom are based at the University of California at Berkeley, and including Dr. Gilbert. The other evidence we have also comes from the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, and is represented by two cranial vaults, Omo 1 and Omo 2, that are dated to approximately 195,000 years before present. So these are the two most complete, earliest fossil evidence known to science that are within the range of anatomically modern humans, or Homo sapiens. Another more interesting line of evidence comes from genomics. So DNA analysis shows that we all share a common ancestry in Africa some 200,000 years ago, but more importantly, about as late as 70,000 years ago. So any living humans today trace back their origin in Africa about 70,000 years ago. The other evidence is behavioral evidence, which is the more difficult one to infer, because some of the behaviors do not fossilize in the archaeological record and are very, very difficult to identify. For example, we do not know when exactly language evolved, because language doesn't fossilize. Or when some of the styles that we see today evolved, because these things do not fossilize. So today we can very easily tell from body scarifications or hairstyles or tattoos what the minds of and behaviors of people are. But in the archaeological record, these things do not make it. So we cannot for sure reconstruct the behavior and minds of these people. So instead, what we do is we rely on material evidence, material remains, such as this one here. So the cut marks on the cranium of the earliest known anatomically modern fossils are indicative of the fact that this cranium and another cranium, the cranium of a juvenile individual, were carefully deflaged in order to curate the crania. And this is indicative of ritualized mortuary practice as early as 160,000 years ago. So once you have these kinds of behavior emerging in the archaeological record, you are literally becoming human. The other evidence we have is, again, from the same area at Herto in the northeastern part of Ethiopia, from where we have the earliest fossils of anatomically modern humans. We see the exploitation of distant resources. So at about 160,000 years ago, we have modern humans exploiting obsidian sources that are as far as 290 kilometers away from their home bases. So these obsidian sources are not the only one on the landscape available to these early humans. They had other sources closer to them, and in fact we have evidence that they have been using the other sources too. But again, we have evidence, geochemical evidence, that they were using sources that are as far as 290 kilometers away from their home bases. So this brings in the question of how obsidian from 290 kilometers made it to the home bases, which are also surrounded by other obsidian sources with equivalent quality. So this brings in the question of trade or exchange. And by the time you see trade or exchange emerging in the archaeological record, you can pretty much hypothesize that people were getting along. So it is plausible that there was language involved and people were pro-social. The other evidence we have comes from present-day Eritrea and South Africa. So in the two places, we have evidence that people were inhabiting coastal areas and exploiting marine resources, which are considered by archaeologists as modern behaviors. The other line of evidence comes from stone tools, particularly pointed pieces that were used as spear tips. And this is a line of evidence that I'll be talking a little bit more about because I was involved in this research. So what we did in the central part of the Ethiopian Rift was, together with my PhD advisor, Dr. David Braun, who is now based at the University of George Washington, we excavated a Middle Stone Age site and recovered a lot of pointed artifacts, such as this one, in situ context. And then we looked at these through microscope in order to identify what kind of damage pattern they have. And it turned out that they have microfracture features that you can't see with your naked eye, but with the help of microscope, you can see these microfracture features, and you can actually measure how much the crack force or the fracture was traveling in the fracture front. And you can reconstruct the fracture velocity, and from the fracture velocity, you can tell what kind of delivery mode that particular piece was used as. So for example, for these particular pieces, we were able to reconstruct that they were used as javelins or prehistoric throwing weapons. And prehistoric throwing weapons were very important because they have a great advantage that I'll talk about. In addition to the microfracture features, we were also able to identify different diagnostic tool shape and damage patterns, such as bearing-like fractures and fractures from twisting or rotating, and proximal thinning, or thinning of the base in order to facilitate the mounting of the piece onto a wooden or other kind of shaft. This hafting or mounting was also supported by additional work, which is micro-wear analysis. This micro-wear analysis shows us that there was some kind of hafting involved, as indicated by the wear pattern at the base of the different artifacts. So why is throwing important in prehistoric times? Because during the Neanderthal times and times before 280,000, you have hafting and spears, but these were thrusting spears. These were handheld and thrusted into prey species, and this is a very dangerous activity because you will be dealing with dangerous prey species, and that will bring you, that will expose you to dangerous outcomes. But throwing enables you to kill at a distance. It avoids these kinds of dangerous confrontations. It increases the lethal range of your weapon, so you can kill from a distance, and you can broaden your niche. In the later part of the African Stone Age, you see these throwing weapons even getting more and more complex. So you see, for example, mechanically assisted projectiles, such as the bow and arrow, and of course, later the throwing spear, or the atlatl in the North American sense of the implement. So in Africa, we see at about 64,000 from South Africa, we see evidence for bow and arrow. This is circumstantial evidence, but experiments show that actually the size of wound that is inflicted by complex projectiles is very big, and complex projectiles were a very great advance in prehistoric times. In fact, since Neanderthals did not have any projectile technology at all, it is hypothesized that complex projectiles are one of the technological advantages that allowed modern humans to outnumber and outcompete Neanderthals. Other evidence we have include from South Africa again, engraved ostrich eggshells and ochre processing kit that are dated to between 60 and 100,000 years before present. And so if you are engraving something like this, that means you have the idea of style and group identity. And if you are, mixing ochre, we know that from the ethnographic present, we use ochre in order to beautify ourselves, particularly common in Eastern and Southern Africa still today. So people had the concept of personal adornment, and they were thinking in abstract terms. So that is none other than intelligent. Another paper that came out the year before last year in Nature, actually it made it to the cover of Nature, was that we had in Africa at 70,000 years ago the presence of microliths. So these kinds of tools were used in the past as defining characters for the European Paleolithic, actually Upper Paleolithic. So we have these appearing in Africa much earlier than they do in the European archaeological record. So most of the things you see that give you insight into the minds and brains of the modern humans in the past are preserved in the archaeological record in the form of more durable artifacts, such as stone tools, decorated barbed bone harpoons, bone points, stone blades, perforated shells, ochre, engraved ochre bars, engraved ostrich eggshells, and beads. So these are things that you find in the African archaeological record from 60 to 100,000 years ago. And you see these in the Eurasian archaeological record much later, probably between 30 and 40,000 years before present. So in order to give you an idea of how contrasting pictures we have, so from Eurasia, engraved ochre bars appear around 34,000 years ago, whereas in Africa we have these kinds of evidence dating to 60 to 75,000 years ago. So what this means is that when you piece together the genetic evidence, the anatomical evidence, and the behavioral evidence, what it means is that once modern humans appear in Africa, they didn't just leave, and the revolutions, like the mental revolutions, the behavioral revolutions, took place in Eurasia. That was an artifact of a Eurocentric view that dominated the anthropological literature for a long period of time. But the current notion we have in the face of accumulating evidence is that our anatomical, genetic, as well as mental evolution was completed in Africa, and modern humans left Africa with the minds that resemble the minds of most of us today. And so we have modern humans leaving Africa around 60,000, and colonizing every known territory in the world. So what this means is that under our skins, we are all the same, and we are all Homo sapiens sapiens, and we all have a common home, and that's Africa. In a broader sense, so whatever identities we have as groups, as different groups, are very beautiful identities that we can identify ourselves with, but these, like, the more we look into them, the more they separate us. Instead, we have a common background, a common heritage in Africa, which is a continent where our modern minds evolved, and our anatomical and genetic makeup was completed. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Wenner-Gren Foundation, the Ethiopian Authority for Research and Conservation of Cultural Heritage, the Paleontological Scientific Trust, the Human Evolution Research Center at UC Berkeley, Middle Awash Project, the California State University East Bay Office of Diversity, the Wonderfest, and individuals, Dr. Henry Gilbert, Dr. Dan Woods, Tucker Hyatt, Marianne, and Dijon. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
So we got plenty of time for questions. Has anybody got questions? I'll walk around with the microphone. We'll be breaking from what we told the sound people we were going to do, but I'm happy to go ahead and do that. Has anybody got any questions for Yonatan? Okay, I'll hand you the mic and I'm going to go out there.
Okay. So what we do is that first we do surveys. We look for signs on the surface, so whatever is eroding from the surface gives you a clue to what the deposits have in them. So surveys are very important. You have to have an understanding of the geology of the area. In East Africa, for example, most of the sites are concentrated in the Rift Valley because you have bigger exposures of thick deposits. But in southern, northern Africa, and in Europe, particularly in the later times, we know that caves and rock shelters were preferred locations for hominids to occupy. So a lot of survey is involved, and test excavations are involved, and looking for some traces as surface finds are also important clues. Have I answered? Sure.
Okay, so I've got one here from the crowd. How are the behaviors of early anatomically modern humans distinct from the behaviors of Neanderthals as evidenced by the fossil and archaeological record?
Could you speak up?
Okay, I'll get the microphone. How about that? Okay, here it comes. Ooh, that's better. How are the behaviors of early anatomically modern humans distinct from the behaviors of Neanderthals as evidenced by the fossil and archaeological record?
If you look at the fossil record, Neanderthal fossils, most of the Neanderthal fossils have trauma because they were using, for example, thrusting spears, and they were using labor-intensive hunting, so they were not very strategic in terms of their hunting. So most of the fossils of Neanderthals have trauma, whereas modern humans were using some of the projectile weapons and snares, for example, and other very intelligent, very clever mechanisms of hunting. So you see like by comparing even the fossils of Neanderthals and modern humans, you can see that they had different strategies of hunting. And the archaeological record in Europe changed dramatically at around 40,000, and that corresponds to the arrival of modern humans in Europe. So basically, before the arrival of modern humans, you are looking at a Neanderthal archaeological record, which is characterized by crude tools in comparison with the African or the modern human toolkits. And you're looking at, for example, lithic assemblage where you don't have the projectile component, which is an exclusive domain to the modern humans.
Okay, and there's a sort of a follow-up to that, which you sort of answered already. Can we really be sure that Homo sapiens is more intelligent than Neanderthals from the archaeological record? I mean, couldn't it be ecological differences as well?
I think I have tried to answer some
you
of it.
Much got that.
Yeah. But also, well, the hypothesis is that you have Neanderthals and modern humans in Europe, obviously, for a certain period of time between 40,000 and 30,000, mostly in Eurasia. These two different species, or as some scientists want to put it, these two different subspecies were inhabiting the same geography, overlapping for tens of thousands of years. And in the end, what you have is modern humans. And this is attributed to the fact that modern humans have superior intelligence and could outcompete the Neanderthals, be it in terms of hunting strategies or in terms of strategies of coping with a changing environment. We know that today the only surviving species of hominids is Homo sapiens. So yes, Homo sapiens were mentally more complex than Neanderthals were.
Yeah, I have been kind of looking through the European archaeological record with an eye for that transitional time when the modern humans come into the area and the Neanderthals start to decline. And one of the things that seems to be pretty sort of contemporary or happening at about the same time is that there's the appearance of dogs or canids, dog types that show evidence of having been adjusted a little bit by domestication. They might be tame wolves. I was wondering, but in Europe, 36 to 38,000 years ago, there seems to be pretty good evidence that domestication of dogs and some of the aspects of intelligence that might allow people to visualize a dog as a really effective hunting partner as opposed to just seeing it as a potential rival for food. Do you see anything in the African record earlier indicating that there might have been some domestication of canids in that area?
It's an interesting new information. I have no idea, I must admit. But it's an interesting information, and I'll make sure I keep an eye open for that. Thank you.
Yeah, the question is how can you explain how these people who went to Europe became white, developed great technologies that eventually allowed them to colonize the rest of the world, while the ones in Africa stayed black and were living mostly in state of savageness until the Europeans came. Can you explain that? That's one thing. The other thing is it has been proven. It has been proven that the Neanderthal, traces of Neanderthal, there are today many people of Europe than the DNA.
DNA evidence shows that only about 2 to 2.5% of certain Europeans is attributed to Neanderthal ancestry. Other than that, more than 97% of their DNA is Homo sapiens, is attributed to Homo sapiens. So basically, today, every human being is Homo sapiens. About the question as to why or how Africa remained backward, in quotation, I would say that it's a way of looking at it. If civilization is defined, in terms of European definitions, then if you look at Africa, yes, Africa is a dark continent, an uncivilized continent, but all the record shows that Africa was, in fact, where all of us became smart. And in fact, even in the historical period, if you look at Africa, there were big civilizations like the Aksumite Empire in northern Ethiopia and present-day southern Eritrea, or the Great Zimbabwe, or the great states and chieftaincies of Western Africa. Africa is not as most of the rest of the world perceives it to be. Africa had very great civilizations in the past, both in the prehistoric and historical period, and whatever differences we see today, particularly over the last 400 and 500 years, were the result of the Europeans having the Industrial Revolution and the gun in particular, and colonizing the rest of the world. So other than that, if you look, that is actually the crux of the talk. If you look deeper in time, you see a better picture of the world and humanity. So we all had a common background in terms of our cognitive capacities, and we all today have equal cognitive capacities. And some of the differences that you mentioned and that you see are the result of, little geographic serendipities and climatic change and, certain things that favor certain people in certain part of the world and disfavor others in other parts of the world. Have I answered? Oh.
I'm going to get Tucker first, and then I'll hop over to you. This will be the entertainment of the whole day.
Oh, thank you. Yonatan, you mentioned that the fracture pattern of the stone tips can reveal the speed of impact of the spear or the arrow. Does that depend also on what the projectile hits? How do archaeologists control for that huge variable, the fracture pattern being determined in part by what the projectile hits, along with the speed with which it's projected?
Thank you. That's a very nice question. For fractures to happen, first of all, there has to be an unyielding target. So if it is hitting the bones of, very dense bones of a prey species, it will initiate a fracture, mostly concentrating on the tip of the spear point. But also if it hits, say, for example, a tree or a rock, what you want is the information on the fracture velocity. And from experiments, we have established that certain fracture velocity thresholds are attributable to certain impact types. So if, for example, the fracture velocities are beyond the threshold of a certain impact, then you can for sure establish that that piece was traveling as a projectile and not thrusted as a thrusting spear. So there is a maximum amount of fracture that you can initiate through thrusting, which is established through experiments. So whether the projectile weapon hit a tree or an animal, the fact remains that it was flowing and it was traveling at a great speed to initiate that kind of fracture with that specific velocity.
I'm wondering whether or not I know you spent a good deal of time on weaponry, and of course it's incredibly important to determine how people live. But I was wondering in a couple of other areas, have you ever paid any particular attention to the discussion of whether or not language and art developed in any specific area? And if yes, can you share a little bit of that with us? And the other part of the reason I'm thinking about that is, of course, we started right there along that, or it appears to be along that Nile Valley, and traveled tens of thousands of miles from there. And I'm wondering, basically, other than, of course, food and weather, what made us pick up and move and travel thousands of miles away?
Language is a very difficult one. So genetic works were trying to show that there's a certain gene responsible for language, the FOXP2, but then that was also identified in ancestral populations, common ancestors for Neanderthals. So they identified it in Neanderthals, so the hypothesis was that it had to be part of the population that was, or the species that was ancestral to Neanderthals as well as modern humans. And we know that that was, today, that is not the only gene responsible for language. And like I said, language doesn't fossilize. So archaeologists rely on different aspects of material culture that give them hints to the capacity for fully syntactical language. For example, certain works are showing that the fact, from hafting, they are trying to infer the capacity for language. So when you're hafting, you are bringing different pieces of material into a single functioning tool, right? So for example, you have the spear point, you have some binding component, say the mastic, and you have the wooden shaft, and you are putting together those three things and creating, say, an arrow or a throwing spear. And certain psychologists are trying to compare that to bringing different words and constructing a sentence, but that's not a solid evidence. And you see rock art or written language much later in the history of mankind. So it's very difficult. But you have, for example, the engraved ochre bars at 70,000. You have decorated ostrich eggshells that were used as water containers at 60,000. And the hypothesis is that they were used as group identity markers. So there was some kind of communication, but whether or not a fully syntactical language was there, we cannot be sure.
So, is this, okay, yeah. I read somewhere that Neanderthal anatomy, well, they had a restricted range of movement in their shoulder, yeah. And I have heard that would have made it difficult for them to use projectile weapons like spears or javelins and slings and things. And I was wondering if there's any truth to that, or if it really is just a demonstration of modern humans' increased intelligence.
There was a paper last year, I think last year or the year before, that also made it to the cover of Nature about throwing, because it's also important, from the current, the modern sports aspect. The capacity to throw in the hominid lineage evolves actually among Homo erectus. So if you put them in line, Homo erectus is way back in time as compared to the Neanderthals. So hypothetically, the capacity should be, the capacity to throwing should be there. The anatomical capacity should be there with Neanderthals. But we don't have any single evidence indicating that they were using projectiles. Even at 30,000, we have evidence now from the site that I'm working at that modern Homo heidelbergensis possibly was throwing spears at game species. So the anatomical capacity would most likely be there, but then the actual archaeological evidence isn't.
What are the latest dates as far as the development of fire in the wheel, and where were they developed, and did climate have any factor into any of this?
When did fire start? Is that the question? Or?
Well, when was it controlled?
Controlled fire?
Yes.
It's also very tricky because you hypothesize the emergence of controlled use of fire from indirect evidence or circumstantial evidence. So we have heard in caves. So those hearth places are indicative of the fact that people were using fire for different purposes, like controlled use of fire. And these come from numerous sites in Africa, but the oldest ones are claimed to be from sites in the Levant, in present-day Israel, in caves, such as Gesher Benut Yaakov. I don't see.
What were the dates of Gesher Benut Yaakov?
For Gesher Benut Yaakov, we have numerous dates. So one of the dates is between 700 and 900,000, which is way back in time. We have a recent research output that says that for sure controlled fire was used between 300 and 400,000.
I heard the term xenophobic and xenophilic, I think related to environmental factors, and Neanderthals, because of a cold environment, tended to be more aggressive in their behaviors, and that aggressive behavior had something to do with their eventual elimination as a group of people. Could you speak to that as a fact or not?
But I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I haven't read anything like that. And if there is anyone who knows about it in the audience who can answer her question.
Oh, sorry. Okay, head back up there. Sorry, no further question there. All right. You don't want to see me climbing for the bleachers again. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what was the earliest evidence of using water for work purposes such as grinding grain or to another activity. So the harnessing of water power, has your work covered that?
Water power? No idea. So, like after the beginning of agriculture, you have people building irrigation canals in the Fertile Crescent, as well as in Egypt, in the lower Nile Valley. So maybe that could be one thing that you can use as a control over water. But when actually people started to tap the power of water, I have no idea. It's too recent for my period of specialty. Sorry.
Yes, I have a more general question. Isn't it justifiable and logical to look at the periods of up to 1 million years earlier, even before the Homos came upon the scene, to look at those periods when tools started becoming more used, and cite that as that seminal moment when we started using intelligence? Why don't we see that as the time when humans first really appeared, because they were making tools?
That's a great question. So the human evolution is full of innovations. So you have, for example, the earliest tools at 2.6 million years ago. But then you have the possibility that Australopithecines were also making stone tools 2.6 million years ago. And that is a different genus, a totally different genus. You have the genus Homo appearing about 2.3 million years ago. And then you have, for example, Homo habilis and Homo erectus, roaming most of the next million or so years. And then you have the Middle Pleistocene, where you have Homo heidelbergensis or Homo rhodesiensis. And these are, these are tool-using hominids, but they were not thinking in abstract ways. They were not planning in depth as much as modern humans do. So in a way, the modern minds that resemble the minds of Homo sapiens today were formed much, much later. And that also corresponds to the enlargement of brain and the development of different parts of the brain that are responsible for different activities. So the modern mind and modern behavior is a much later phenomenon in the evolution of humans.
Okay, so I'm going to come down there in a second. I got one more up here, and then I'm down there, and then I'm down there. Okay.
Thanks so much. You've completely convinced me that projectile weapons are one key technological innovation that separates modern humans. Are there any other particular technologies that you think are indicative also of modern human behavior, other than, for example, the beads and the pigmentation you also covered? Are there any other technologies that you would say are indicative of modern humans?
So, for example, bedding mat was recovered from Sibudu Cave in South Africa, and the use of snares to catch small animals, small and hard to catch animals, was also recovered from sites in South Africa. So these are very unique to modern humans. In fact, not only to modern humans, but to modern humans in the later part of the Pleistocene, as opposed to the middle part of the Pleistocene. So you have modern humans appearing around 200,000, but you don't see these kinds of evidence up until, say, 70 or 60,000. So the rate of innovation was increasing, and you start to see different, much more complex cultural innovations emerging. And some of the reasons that archaeologists have to explain these kinds of increased innovation include, social dynamics and demographic factors, and high fidelity transfer of knowledge, for example. Sure.
Good evening. Are you familiar with the works of Sheikh Anta Diop?
No.
Okay, well, he's an anthropologist. They have a hospital named after him in Senegal. Okay, so he talked about language, and he was able to trace some of the language from antiquity from Egypt through Senegal and parts of Ghana. But I did want you to follow up on this young man's question. It was like two parts to it. If you can talk about the cause of migration.
Okay. Did you say Sheikh Anta Diop?
Yes.
Yes, I'm familiar. So the cause of migration of modern humans is mostly attributed to climatic change. There were cold phases that trapped most of the sea water, and sea levels dropped, and most of Africa was dry, so people were forced out of Africa. And there are two hypothetical routes of migration. One of them is the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. One of them is a very narrow strait, which when the sea level drops would be a very dry land. The other one is the Levantian corridor up there. So two possible routes were used, and modern humans left Africa. Probably they left Africa at different times. Say, for example, they most likely left Africa at about 100 or 110,000 through Egypt, through the Sinai desert, or the Levantian corridor. But that group that left Africa about 110,000 years ago was not successful, didn't make it outside of the Levant. So the most successful group that is believed to have colonized the rest of the world is the one that made it out of Africa around 60,000. And the responsible cause for that is mostly paleoclimatic factors.
Okay, so two more questions here. One for you, sir.
Good. Could you expound on when the continents were all together, the continental drift theory and the civilization in Africa at that time, and also about the time period when the Sahara Desert was known as fertile land?
Henry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. When the Sahara Desert was last fertile, and at what point in the past was there a common civilization in Africa? Got that correct? When Pangea was together, a long time ago. Okay.
Pangea, or Du Bois calls it Gondwana land. Right.
When the continents were together? That's how many million years ago? That's millions of years ago. 250 million years ago? Okay, maybe. That's a lot of millions of years ago, when the when the different continents were together, this entire evolution of humans we're talking about took place between about 6 and 7 million years ago, when you have the split with chimpanzees, which are our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. So we're talking about the evolution of the human line over the past 6 million years ago. And in that large period, we are focusing only on the few 100,000 years ago, when our species, Homo sapiens, emerged.
Okay, so one more question here, and then it's getting towards the end.
I came late, so I may not have caught this, but I have a question about the DNA evidence that goes back to the Neanderthal DNA evidence, and also the early human DNA, and how is that acquired, and is that acquired from hair fibers or something like that, and how viable is it? I mean, how far can we dig back, and how viable is that evidence that we have? And you also mentioned something, I think, about that there is some evidence of Neanderthal DNA in humans.
Yeah.
And is that only for a certain region?
The genome studies are very solid. They are pretty solid. And the DNA samples are recovered from mostly from bones, where you have very exceptional preservation conditions. So, for example, for Africa, that is literally impossible, even for younger periods, because most of the sites we have are open air sites, and the climatic condition is not very good for preservation of DNA material. But in Europe and Western Asia, you have unique preservation conditions that allow for the extraction of samples from bones or hair or whatever organic parts. And then from those samples, geneticists will be sequencing the DNA of those particular species. And with that, they were able to show that every human being traces back origin in Africa as old as 200,000 years ago, or as late as 70,000 years ago. And the second question is, yes, we have, the answer for your second question is, yes, we have about 2.5% of the DNA of certain groups in Europe attributable to Neanderthal ancestry, and about 5% of the genetic makeup of certain people in Southeast Asia, in the Polynesian islands, attributable to the Denisovan line. But most of the genetic package of every human being today is of Homo sapiens that left Africa about 60,000 years ago.
So that Neanderthal DNA is not in the African origin Homo sapiens, but it is in
Yes, yes.
So first off, brilliant talk. Second, my question is, I'm wondering, with the rise of projectile points, spears, and arrowheads in the archaeological record, do you see changes in faunal remains associated with these hominid sites? Do you see perhaps a shift from slower, more lumbering bovids to antelope and more running animals with the ability to, say, fire an arrow? Are the human processed faunal remains at these sites shifting in correlation with the change in technology?
Definitely, very nice question. Definitely, yes. And the best sites in which these kinds of patterns are shown are from South Africa. So, for example, the Classius River mouth, where you have a distinction between different archaeological horizons in the amount of abundance of body parts. So that gives you an insight into whether you had first access to the keel or whether you were scavenging. And then, and also species representation, like you said. So difficult to catch species were represented in the archaeological record in periods after the evolution of projectile weaponry.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Yonatan. You've answered a lot of questions.
Thank you.